Okay. Greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. We're going to continue on tonight with the issue with the Postal Service and their dishonor. And before I go any further, I want to explain that once again, I'm not moving forward trying to claim any kind of retribution or anything like that. It's simply communications, intellect, competencies, things like that to clear the record and make things right. Again, it's under the Directive 50 U.S.C. 4305 B2, where no person shall be held liable in any court, and that is for a full acquittance and discharge for all parties. So while we're getting ready to get started, I want to thank everybody for joining me. Of course, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. If you're on Hecklebus, get over to El Perro and do it. And if you're on El Perro, get over to Hecklebus. Hit that like, share, and subscribe to help the algorithms. There are a couple PayPal links in the details section down below the video. The top one is for those that have a PayPal account. The one at the bottom is for those that don't. Please be sure to use the friends and family as a donation to help prevent any issues with PayPal for me. And in the meantime, if you remember the last video, we ended on the negotiable instruments, whether it's a note or a draft. And tonight we're going to start out with the next part of the UCC code that we're talking about as it relates to the discharge of secondary obligors. The discharge of secondary obligors, UCC 3-605. If a person entitled to enforce an instrument, and by the way, the folks, the link for the StreamYard panel is pinned to the top, so feel free to jump on up. Always appreciate any commentary. So, if a person entitled to enforce an instrument releases the obligation of a principal obligor in whole or in part, and another party of the instrument is a secondary obligor with respect to the obligation of that principal obligor, the following rules apply. So basically, when you have a secondary and primary obligation, there exists a secondary and primary liability. And it's distinctly known that if the one signing the instruments is the authorized representative and they don't hold liability, then the liability must still remain with the primary obligor. As we discussed in one of the previous videos, the obligor is identified by a number. Okay. Any obligations of the principal obligor to a secondary obligor with respect to any previous payment by the secondary obligor are not affected. So the obligations of the principal obligor to the secondary obligor are not affected despite any payments by the secondary obligor, unless the terms of the release preserve the secondary obligor's recourse. The principal obligor is discharged to the extent of the release from any other duties to the secondary obligor under this title. So again, that's at 50 U.S.C. 4305 B2. You're going to release under that discharge to the extent of the release from any other duties to the secondary obligor. The principal obligor is discharged. So you're going to give a discharge for the principal obligor under 50 U.S.C. 4305. That's the discharged. The full acquittance, as it relates to it, is the full faith and credit. And the acquittance, as we went over in one of my previous videos, is talking about the peace terms. And that's all you're doing is it's a negotiable instrument, and you're coming to the terms of peace. Unless the terms of the release provide that the person entitled to enforce the instrument remains or retains the right to enforce the instrument against a secondary obligor. Person entitled to enforce the instrument retains the right to enforce the instrument against the secondary obligor. The secondary obligor is discharged to the same extent as the principal obligor from any unperformed portion of its obligation on the instrument. From any unperformed portion. Does that sound like the unpaid balance of money or its equivalent of its obligation on the instrument? As I said, I noted it in specifics, especially writing down the term in species known as in credit. If the instrument is a check and the obligation of the secondary obligor is based on an endorsement of the check, remember we spoke about the draft being a check, the secondary obligor is discharged with regard to the language or circumstances of the discharge or other release. When we talk about an endorsement, there are several. There's a special endorsement, there's a blank endorsement, and there's an anomalous endorsement. Now, the anomalous endorsement is what we're going to talk about next. But it's done. I'm not going to, you can look up anomalous endorsement in the UCC. I can't remember exactly what code it is, but just put UCC anomalous endorsement. But it goes to the accommodation as well as the accord and satisfaction by use of instrument. And Joyce is the one that is going to use the instrument, but she's going to hand it to me. She's the holder. She's one of the parties able to enforce it as a principal. And she's going to let me take care of it as a third party. If a person entitled to enforce an instrument releases the obligation, releases the obligation of a principal obligor in whole or in part, and another party to the instrument is a secondary obligor. I'm her companion. So I with her, the two become one. 1 USC 1. Singular imports the plural, and plural imports the singular. So if she is a secondary obligor, I am also in the plural form as we, a secondary obligor. And I have the competency to take care of it for her where she doesn't. She doesn't understand all of this stuff. I do. 2 heads are better than 1. If the secondary obligor is not discharged under paragraph 2, the secondary obligor is discharged to the extent of the value of the consideration for the release, and to the extent that the release would otherwise cause the secondary obligor a loss. So if they're demanding that she pay for it through a statement of services and not a bill, it would most certainly be a loss because it is not a bill and it indicates that there's another method. Along with Public Law 90, HJR 192, excuse me. We have no way to pay. So let's look at the next one. Like I said, accord and satisfaction. Accord and satisfaction by use of instrument. If a person against whom a claim is asserted proves that 1, that person in good faith tendered an instrument to the claimant as full satisfaction of the claim. 2, the amount of the claim was unliquidated or subject to a bona fide dispute. I'm disputing the terms as they interpret them, because the way I interpret the terms is I get to use those terms and they're supposed to accept them as long as they are part of the process. To not accept them is the dishonor. And 3, the claimant obtained payment of the instrument. And this is what they're refusing. They're saying that I can't pay that purchase price. So they're not allowing the payment. So therefore, they have not obtained the payment. That is the dishonor. The following subsections apply. Unless subsection C applies, the claim is discharged if the person against whom the claim is asserted proves that the instrument or accompanying written communication. And like I said yesterday, Simone was kind enough to inform me of this. And this is where we find it, in the UCC. I remember it, forgot all about it, and thought written communication meant electronic email. Written is not punching keys. It is not pressing keys like we decided at the key in postal terms was to press numbered keys or other identifiers, telling us that the number is an identifier. And as we earlier discussed here, the obligor is identified by a number. And you can give a number in lieu of a name and address. So you can use numbers for the identification rather than other identifiers known as letters. However, an accompanying written communication, also known as a letter, contained a conspicuous statement to the effect that the instrument was tendered as full satisfaction of the claim. Under accord and satisfaction, 3-311, by use of instrument, as an accommodating party, all I have to do is put a number, which is my number, and for accommodation. I don't have to sign it with my name. The signature itself is, quote, for accommodation. And we'll look at that. Subject C, subject to subsection D, a claim is not discharged under subsection B if either of the following applies. The claimant, if an organization, and the claimant would be the Postal Service. I'm not claiming that it's not paid. I'm claiming that they're not accepting my payment. Proves that 1, within a reasonable time before tender, the claimant sent a conspicuous statement to the person against whom the claim is asserted that communications concerning disputed debts, including an instrument tendered as full satisfaction of a debt, are to be sent to a designated person, office, or place. So now the positions change because I've already communicated concerning disputes. I went with clarification. They disputed it. Now I'm a claimant. Now I can write a handwritten claim to the designated office, Board of Governors, Office of Inspector General of the Post Office, Louis DeJoy, and the Board of Governors, or place. And two, the instrument or accompanying communication was not received by that designated person, office, or place. So they didn't receive it. So I have to fix this part right here. It's not discharged until they receive it. And then the claimant, whether or not an organization proves that within 90 days after payment of the instrument, the claimant tendered repayment of the amount of the instrument to the person against whom the claim is issued. No payment is had, so I got 90 days. This paragraph does not apply if the claimant is an organization. See, we're not organized. The claimant, whether or not an organization. This paragraph does not apply if the claimant is an organization that sent a statement complying with paragraph 1I. So we're not an organization, so we didn't follow that. Within a reasonable time before the tender, the claimant sent a conspicuous statement. Now, when I tendered it, I never sent a statement because I'm not an organization that was required to do so. And why wasn't I required to do so? Because it's not common knowledge. It's not put out to people that are not organized. We have to look this shit up. To the person against whom the claim is asserted, that communications concerning disputed debts, including the instrument tendered as full satisfaction of debt, are to be sent to a designated person in office. So I've got the communications. I've got the notes of the people I spoke to. I've got the dates, the times. And all I got to do is write up a letter of my communications and letting them know that they aren't accepting the payment in cash as noted on the instrument, because they are claiming that I have to pay both cash and debit, when it says clearly cash or debit. And then when I give them the number, according to Michael DeWall, the acting postmaster at the local Waterloo office, says that the machine is not allowing him to enter in the number because the parameter, the box where he's supposed to enter in that number, is grayed out now. So let's look at the next one. Let me double check the panel here, see if anybody wants to come up. Nobody up there. I do want to say hello to everybody. Greetings, Norm Longstaff, Travis Turner, Five Hut, Jen B, Bo Hydrus. Who else? Aaron. Greetings. Be sure to hit that like, share, and subscribe button, folks. If you're on Hecklebus, get over to El Perro and do the same. And if you're on El Perro, get over to Hecklebus and do the same. And let's see here. Let me look at the comments. Unborn for psychological anguish prints. Unborn for psychological anguish prints. I like that. That's a pretty good deal there. That's what you get with that spell of illness. Unborn psychological anguish prints. They smack you and then take your footprints. All right, well, let's get back to it. So now that we have that part figured out, our next step for the accord and satisfaction by use of instrument is that letter. So that's what I'm working on. Oops, wrong one. Okay, the next one, UCC 3-419, instruments signed for accommodation. If an instrument is issued for value given for a benefit of a party to the instrument, accommodated party, which is my companion, Joyce, and another party to the instrument, accommodation party, signs the instrument for the purposes of incurring liability on the instrument without being a direct beneficiary of the value given for the instrument is signed by the accommodation party, quote, for accommodation. Being that I don't have a direct benefit from this because we're not receiving anything, but actually releasing debts, and it's not my debt, I'm allowed to do so. An accommodation party may sign the instrument as maker, drawer, acceptor, endorser. Again, that's that anomalous endorser for accommodation with a number in lieu of the name and address. So again, if you're giving a number in lieu of the name and address and they want a signature, then you don't give them the name. You give them an anomalous signature for accommodation. This keeps the beneficiary hidden and protected. Notice my companion's name is not on any of that except for the document of title, which is known as that statement of services. And subject to subsection D, is obliged to pay the instrument in the capacity in which the accommodation party signs. In the capacity in which the accommodation party signs. I am her trustee. She is my life beneficiary. I am her life beneficiary. She is my life trustee. I am her life trustee. We grant each other things, gifts. We don't charge each other. When people do try to charge us, we step up and say, hey, we never paid for that. Somebody else did. It's already paid for. In which the accommodation party signs, the obligation of an accommodation party may be enforced, notwithstanding any statute of frauds. And I clarified this many times. I'm not trying to commit any kind of fraud. I'm going forth with the letter of the law as I know it and comprehend it. And I'm putting the terms and conditions forth and expecting the people that I'm putting them forth to comprehend them. And yet I find none. Again, this will go to the competencies that we'll be talking about in a later video. And whether or not the accommodation party receives consideration for the accommodation. Remember, we spoke about the consideration, the with side ration. I'm not in the military, so I don't get rations. I'm already fulfilled. I am the cup that's welling over. A person signing an instrument is presumed to be an accommodation party. And there is notice that the instrument is signed for accommodation if the signature is an anomalous signature, or excuse me, an anomalous endorsement. An anomalous endorsement. There is no name. It just says for accommodation, and the parties are identified by number instead of a name and address. Or is accompanied by words indicating that the signer is acting as surety or guarantor. I told you I'm Joyce's trustee. I let them know. Guarantor. And I told them I guarantee with respect to the obligation of another party to the instrument. I'm an ally, and that's what guarantees full accord and satisfaction, full acquittance and discharge, full faith and credit. Except as provided in section 3-605, which we already read, discharge of secondary obligors. The obligation of an accommodation party to pay the instrument is not affected by the fact the person enforcing the obligation had notice when the instrument was taken by that person that the accommodation party signed the instrument for accommodation. So when they don't take that accommodation or for accommodation, and they don't do as directed on that form and do the conversion from rural money order transaction application internally to the domestic postal money order, then they are failing their primary obligation. Joyce, being the secondary obligor, not capable or competent of it, has a trustee in life who is. If the signature of a party to an instrument is accompanied by words indicating unambiguously that the party is guaranteeing collection rather than payment of the obligation of another party to the instrument. Again, the collection is to they can't collect an asset from you. That has to be a grant. That has to be an equal consideration or a grant. So it's guaranteeing collection of something that was already instrumentalized. What they have you doing today is creating new instruments. Every time you sign a document, you're signing another instrument, and it creates another debt. If you're the creditor, then it shouldn't be creating any debt. Credit should circulate so that when you put it out, it comes back to you. Therefore, no debt. The signer is obliged to pay the amount due on the instrument to a person entitled to enforce the instrument only if execution of judgment against the other party has been returned unsatisfied. The judgment's already been placed. These particular codes are the judgment already placed on the process of service and how it operates. It's already been executed. Execution of judgment against the party has been returned unsatisfied. So the execution of that form 6307 or 6387, when I gave it to them for proper processing, it was returned, even though there's an executive judgment already on the record. The other party is insolvent or an insolvency proceeding. 3, the other party cannot be served with process. Joyce is in fact retired and needs to go through the estate recovery program to resign accordingly so that this does not happen continuously and repeatedly, causing a liability to be placed on the record where she is neither expecting to nor intending to as the insured party. Or it is otherwise apparent that payment cannot be attained from the other party. Again, House Joint Resolution 192. The only way we have to pay for anything is, in fact, credit. All of those instrumentalities or obligations and other securities of the United States are of the same kind. You'll notice they all say note. United States Treasury notes, Federal Reserve notes, all these other terms and stuff, those are all of like kind. They're promises. They're not orders. The executive order is 18 U.S.C. 8. That's the order, and it pertains to promises. If the signature of a party to an instrument is accompanied by words indicating that party guarantees payment, or the signer signs the instrument as accommodation party in some other manner that does not unambiguously indicate an intention to guarantee collection rather than payment, the signer is obliged to pay the amount due on the instrument to a person entitled to enforce the instrument. So if the United States tries to enforce it, being insolvent, the only way I can pay them is in credit. Does that make sense? In the same circumstances as the accommodated party would be obliged, without prior resort to the accommodated party by the person entitled to enforce the instrument. Without prior resort. So she's been paying this bill for a while and it still keeps going the wrong way. And that's because nobody along the line is competent to know exactly how to process this stuff. It's strictly a statement of services. It is not a bill. Therefore, you cannot demand payment, but rather I can provide for the proper collection of the revenue generated, which is credit. An accommodation party who pays the instrument is entitled to reimbursement from the accommodated party and is entitled to enforce the instrument against the accommodated party. In proper circumstances, an accommodation party may obtain relief that requires the accommodated party to perform its obligation on the instrument, which would merely be a signature saying that she is the authorized representative and therefore not liable. An accommodated party that pays the instrument has no right of recourse and is not entitled to contribution from an accommodation party. Greetings, Joe Moore, UCC 3-603B. Let's take a look at that real quick, just for shits and giggles. 3-603. Oh, tender of payment. Yep, that's tender of payment. And B is if tender of payment of an obligation to pay an instrument is made to a person entitled to enforce the instrument and the tender is refused, there is discharge. Right. And that's what I explained to him. I explained to him that you either accept my directive for full acquittance and discharge, or you deny it and discharge happens automatically. Very important. Yes. UCC 3-603. B, if tender of payment of an obligation to pay an instrument is made to a person entitled to enforce it, the instrument and the tender is refused, there is discharge. Now, if it's made to the extreme cable company, but it never reaches them because the Postal Service is the one denying it, then there is still discharge of obligation because the discharge of, or the primary obligor is in fact the judicial office, which is a independent and neutral office within the United States Postal Service, comprising of the judicial officer, the administrative law judge, and the Postal Board of Contract Appeals. So, instrument signed for accommodation because it's being used for accord and satisfaction, for discharge of secondary obligors being plural of the obligor. And again, because I'm her partner in life, it is plural. So one become two and two become one, just like one, USC one. Singular imports the plural and plural imports the singular. The next one I'm going to go to, we're going to quit with the codes for a minute. Probably take up the rest of this stream for these other codes. And what we're going to do is we're going to go with etymology, of course. And we're talking about posterior. This is as it relates to the preamble, to form a more perfect union, including the general welfare, domestic tranquility, all that, for our posterior. Later in time, in other words, when they wrote that document, it was meant for themselves and those that came later in time after them. After, later, behind. Comparative of posteris, coming after, subsequent, from post, after. meaning situated behind, later in position than another or others. That's the adjective. Related is posterior. Posterior as a noun. Buttocks, the hinder parts of the body of a human or animal. Euphemistic 1610s from posterior, adjective. Earlier it meant those who come after, posterity. They think about the popularity context, and the people that win those contests supposedly have some kind of posterity because of what came before them, not particularly for their own talents, but what came before them, what was greater than them, what provided for them. The last, the hindmost, from pause, at, by. By, stand by. Remember we spoke about that as it relates to at law, in law. By, stand by. I stand by the United States as an ally. How is this possible? Because it couldn't possibly be that my mother bare me as an enemy of the state, because she herself was a peaceful woman. Therefore, being native to the land, because the nativity, the event that happened, was on the land. These are the things people need to really get into and discern for yourself. That's why I bring this stuff out. These videos, despite the fact there's going to be many of them, are a condensed version of what I put in the last 7 years. So I know it's hard to keep up, but when it comes down to sitting down at the table with these folks, I guarantee I'll be able to define every element that we're working with here. So impost, as it relates to Congress, shall lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Impost as a noun. So remember we had posterior and it was post, and now it's impost. Tax, duty. So tax and duty are synonymous, right? From medieval Latin impostum, a tax imposed. Imposed. Do you feel imposed upon? Did they impose upon you? Did they encroach upon your privacy? Noun use of neuter of Latin impostus, contracted form of impositus. Past participle of imponere, to place upon. To place upon. Impose upon. See imposter. Compare depot. Do you suppose they left one letter out and it's depost? Take away. Depost. Deposition. To place. Impose. Pose. Impost and pose. Impost, impose. The next one. Imposter, noun. Swindler, cheat. A deceiver. Agent, noun, from impostus, contraction of impositus, past participle of imponere, place upon, impose upon, deceive. Into, in, on, upon. To put, place. Huh? Impost and imposter are the exact same thing then, huh? To place. So imposter is actually a verb. It's an action. Why do they use it as a noun? One who passes himself off as another. Impostris or impostrix in genitive feminine form. The next one, pose. Verb. Post. Verb. Impost. Noun. It's an adoption and conversion, the English language. Pose. Suggest something is so. Suppose, assume, grant. Concede. Put. Place. Propose. So, post. Impost is to put, place, propose. That sounds like position. To position. Oh, see position. To put, place. Cause to put or rest. Pose, verb 2. To puzzle, confuse, perplex. To put questions to. Interrogate closely. Suppose, assume. To put place, or to put, place, set, as set, asset. See, pose, it's already posed, it's already positioned. It's as set in the letter of the law. Also, in some cases, a shortening of the English oppose, examine closely. Does that sound like investigate? Inspect? And directly from oppose, of which oppose was a variant. Related, posed, posing. Pose as a noun. Act of posing the body. So imposed as a noun would be more correctly defined as the act of doing so. Attitude, position, whether taken naturally or assumed for effect. Better know what you're doing. You better know the results it's going to have. 1818 from pose, verb 1, in a sense developed in the French cognate, figurative, attitude of mind or conduct. From 1884, earlier in English, it meant something deposited. A pledge. Oops. So, like I said, when you put something to the accounting, when you place something in the accounting, you deposited something into the accounting. It was a pledge. If you're going to pledge something, make sure you do it, the pledge, in the full faith, constantly affirming His will, so that the works you commit to, the effect is good and profitable unto men. Position as a noun, position as a term in logic and philosophy, statement of belief, the laying down, the setting, the placing of a proposition or thesis. Proposition, a future position, a forward position, not posthumous. Position, position, supposition, and directly from Latin positium, nominative positio, act or fact of placing, situation, position, affirmation. Constantly affirming the faith in the will of our Father which art in heaven, so that the effect of our works is good and profitable unto man. Noun of state from past participle stem of poner, put, place. Watkins tentatively identifies this from the Pi Proto-Indo-European, P-O-S-I-N-E-R-E, from apo, off, away. To leave, let, A-P-O-C, sight, opposite. You see where they get it? Opposite. The opposite of position, where you place something, the opposite is to leave. But Devan identifies it as from Proto-Italic, posine, from Pi, Proto-Indo-European, T-K-I-N-E, to build, live, to settle, dwell, be home. What is your post in life? Are you home, or are you being required to use somebody else's post? If you believe you are being required to use somebody else's post, I keep telling you, you can make homemade stamps and be your own post master, home master. Do you get it? The meaning, place occupied by a person or thing. People or person, place, or thing. The meaning, noun. Verb. Noun, 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 verb. Especially a proper or appropriate place. Pro, per, pro person. Appropriate, as in the budget, appropriations. Place is from 1540s, hence status, standing, social rank, official station. Remember our office, FICE, F-I-C, as opposed to facere, F-A-C-E-R-E. And so it's actually a English adoption of F-I-C, and they put the E on there just like French, F-A-C-E-R-E. Employment. The meaning, manner in which some physical thing is arranged or posed. Aggregate of the spatial relations of a body or figure to other such bodies or figures, like kind, one for one, dollar for dollar, is recorded by 1703, specifically in reference to dance steps. 1778, to sexual intercourse. 1883, military sense of place occupied or to be occupied. To be or not to be is the question. To be or its opposite, that is the question. Position, verb, to assume a position, to presume a position. Intransitive from position and noun. Transitive sense of place or put in relation to other objects. Now the usual meaning is recorded from 1817. This is the usual meaning of position. The OIG, And whistleblower departments only take the reports from public agents' employees. Correct. From public agents or employees. So in your communications, while you're communicating with the employees, trying to take this information, it's the same thing as blowing a whistle. You're giving them something new. It's called news, and it's new to them, but they're not accepting it. That's dishonor. I don't care where you're at in that line. It's dishonor. At that point, you no longer deal with public agents and employees. You deal with the military. Office of Inspector General. General, a military term. That's why we use the selective service number to make sure they're getting their shit right. You signed me up as a contract warrant officer. So anyway, folks. Yeah, like I said at the beginning of the video, I have to go back and watch. It clearly says that we're supposed to be communicating with them in writing to the designated person. And like I said, in regards to the Postal Service, I was on the line with Simone, and Simone cleared that up for me. And that was one of the things I had forgotten. Though I had written things down and presented it to the postmaster and Kim, neither one of them accepted it. I did give the communication to Michael DeWall, and he has a copy of that now, so he can do further research and educate himself. Kim, however, refused even that communication and said, oh, no, that's not going to happen, when I asked her to do the research and educate herself. So that there itself is dishonor, not just in their corporate capacity, but in an individual capacity as a private being, saying, no, I'm just going to remain stupid. You have to deal with me doing my job in a stupid fashion. And that ain't going to happen. That's not going to continue. She will either learn to do her job as appropriately, as she has been budgeted through those emoluments which provide for her duty and obligation, primarily. You want to play your fucking word games with me? You're dealing with the wrong one. You're going to lose. Every last one of them. So think about this stuff, folks. I'll be back again tomorrow night, same time, same channel. In the meantime, God bless. I love you. You know I don't give a fuck whether you love me back. Just remember, God bless. Don't believe me. Don't believe your neighbor. Don't believe the government. And don't, for crying out loud, believe your mother. Please do your research. That's why I'm doing this stuff. This, like I said, it's condensed. You've got time to sit there and do a little bit of research to help yourself out. I've spent 7 years doing this because I got to help myself out, and I got to help my companion out. So think about it. And again, remember, God bless. We'll see you later. Bye.